Hi, everyone. Welcome to the All Things Amyloid podcast, where we feature patients, caregivers, and clinicians who discuss amyloidosis, a rare and incurable disease. Amyloidosis occurs when the body builds up abnormal amounts of misfolded amyloid protein, which can lead to serious and life threatening outcomes. I'm your host, Mackenzie, an amyloidosis patient and founder of Mackenzie's Mission. Our goal for this podcast is to raise awareness and share firsthand what it's like to live with this disease, to care for those affected by it, and to treat it. We hope this leads to earlier diagnosis and start of treatment, which will improve patient lives. What if you're a caregiver for one of your parents as they live with symptoms of a devastating disease, hereditary amyloidosis? You have to watch them deteriorate, see their life become more difficult, and you knew that at the time there were no treatments available. You dig in, do your research, and discover that amyloidosis goes back at least 5 generations in your family. In addition, research reveals future generations, including yourself and your children, have a 50-50 chance of testing positive. The good news is there are now treatments available to slow progression of the disease. In today's episode, we'll be talking with Dawn about her family journey with hereditary amyloidosis. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and helping Mackenzie's mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us today and being willing to share your story with us. So, where do we begin with your family journey?
Yes, as we mentioned, this is a hereditary disease, which means it gets passed on from generation to generation. And for me, this disease, hereditary amyloidosis, has been with me in my memory since I think I was 15 years old, and I'm currently 52. So, a long time. And my own personal story of the disease starts when I was a caregiver for my own mother. Um, My mother was a caregiver for my grandmother. And again, I got to be the caregiver for her. And I don't think it hits people that because of the generational aspect of this disease, the hereditary nature, is that every 10 to 15 years, the caregiver becomes the patient.
Mm.
So with my mom, my grandma, her as a caregiver, her mother passed in 1986. And then 10 years later, my mom started showing her first signs, and we weren't quite sure how they were related. It was always she had these symptoms of, urinary tract infections again and again and again.
Hmm.
Um, and as her disease progressed and we were searching for a diagnosis, in tandem, my uncle, her own brother, started developing the disease as well. And this disease causes a lot of chaos as it's multi-systemic. And my stepdad was trying to help her as best he could, but he asked if I would come home. So, as a 30-year-old woman, I moved back to my childhood home and quit my corporate job and started becoming a caregiver. And really, it was more like a project manager. Things were very chaotic. And what made it even another layer of difficulty is that because of this being a rare disease, and the medical system they were in is very good at general medicine. We were stuck in a medical web, and getting anyone, to listen to our thoughts like, hey, we think this is amyloidosis, was quite challenging. And because there was no really a treatment to point to, a lot of the doctors didn't give it a lot of thought. They said they would just treat it per symptom. We'll give her this medication because she has a UTI. Oh, I noticed that, she has seizures. Okay, maybe we should put her on seizure medication. Maybe we should do an MRI. So I just felt like we are constantly, going down the rabbit hole. Finally, I had 2 years of her symptoms progressing. And by then, not only does she have the reoccurring UTIs, but then we've got the bilateral polyneuropathy. And there was one doctor, because every doctor I spoke to, I said, we think it's amyloidosis. We really feel it's amyloidosis. My grandmother went to the specialty center in Boston. We really feel this. And one hospitalist wasn't even a specialist at all, because that doctor had done a rotation at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He's like, I've seen this. you need to get to a specialty center. That's the ethical thing to do. And within a month of talking to this doctor, we finally got in front of the specialist in Boston. And they confirmed that, yes, just like my grandmother, it was amyloidosis. And that's when they offered the genetic testing. And that was in 2001. And because I had gone through such an emotional journey with my mom and seeing all the dead ends that we faced, I felt it was important for me to know.
Mhm.
And even though I wouldn't see the symptoms until my 40s, I felt like that was my stake in the sand, my line in the sand per se, to start my own fight, because I knew I wasn't going to walk in to that medical web without my own role to define.
Yeah, there really is
So I go
some
ahead.
power in having confirmation and knowing kind of what it is to expect
Mhm.
because you're right. It it just makes it so much less easier to get lost in this system that we experience as patients. So I can certainly understand the value in wanting to know kind of before things get out of hand.
Before things get chaotic, because it does get chaotic, and I watched, tracking her medicine and tracking her doctor's appointment and getting, she went on disability and getting her disability filed. It was just so much to handle, and I thought that's not going to be my path. And my family was very supportive of me getting genetic testing. And what was funny, they're like, well, you look like your father, so you won't carry the disease, all these kind of folklore-ish, you know, means to be supportive. And but I was positive, and
Yeah.
that kind of informed me. Was single. I had no intention of being married at that time. And I hadn't even thought about like what that means for life insurance. I just thought, well, I'm doing this now. No, I'm jumping with both feet. No genetic counseling, nothing. It was just me jumping both feet in.
So kind of going a little bit more into the family aspect here, right? Your mom was a caregiver for her mother, your grandmother, right? And then you were a caregiver for your mother. And I think it
Mhm.
really does a nice job of illustrating and emphasizing the generational rippling effect, really the generational trauma that a disease like this
Yeah.
can cause in families.
Yeah. And I like that you're hitting on upon that. It didn't really strike me as trauma until I looked back at all the rippling effects of family relationships. When my mom and my uncle were both experiencing the disease, they weren't talking because they were both angry with each other about how their own mother passed. And then, my aunt, who was the third child and didn't carry the genetic marker, she was in the middle of these two siblings that she loved very much who were getting sick and not talking to each other. And, me trying as best I can to pull family members together so we can talk and keep this out in the open and not make it a secret. And
Yeah.
so that generation of we're not bearing things to help others not experience pain. We're experiencing pain in the moment,
Yeah.
so that future generations can benefit from knowledge. So what broke my heart a lot was that because of the generational trauma, it was a secret. Pain was the secret. Your symptoms were a secret. We didn't talk about, you know, I wish I could have a conversation with my mom. Like, when did you first start experiencing tingling in your hands? When did you first start experiencing UTIs? What does it feel like to have a seizure? Can you feel them coming? To be inside her body so that and for my own morbid curiosity, what do I look for? So that's trauma of
Yeah.
always kind of looking shadow in the corner of this may happen to me, and not being able to be fully present in your own life and knowing that this is my own path.
Yeah. Yeah. I can certainly imagine that's tremendously scary and how you live each day to day wondering, oh, is this it? Is it starting? What's this symptom,
Mhm.
this cough, this kind of seemingly benign symptom could be the start of right your chaos. So
Right. Rather than
I
just living life and being like, I'm having an off day.
yeah, yeah. So kind of going back to your family, you mentioned your aunts and your uncles and your cousin, but kind of generally more broadly, were they aware of the hereditary amyloidosis in their family?
What was interesting is that my grandmother and her cousin Dawn, and my grandmother Juanita were very close. And they both experienced the disease and passed from the disease. And so there was an information disconnect between the cousins. And it wasn't until after my mother passed that I decided as kind of way to process my grief was to dive right in and bring create an oral history and try to weave together all our symptoms. So by the time my mother passed, my uncle and younger cousins at her generation level were able to benefit from a very fast domino liver transplant. So it was everyone getting these liver transplants that brought us together. The local specialty hospital in the Bay Area handled all of the liver transplants and knew about my mom and how she was denied and made sure that her cousins didn't get denied early. So it was me being able to go to the hospital and talk to our cousins and realize that because our particular strain, there's 120 strains plus, and ours is a rarer subset that doesn't just affect the body, but also crosses the blood-brain barrier. So
Mm.
there's an element of dementia. And many of the cousins thought, well, the liver is a one and done. You take out the liver, you take out the organ that's causing all this chaos, and you're healthy, happy, you're good to go. And it was me talking to a cousin within my generation to say, no, it's not done. It's not done at all. And not only that, but the liver transplant also causes the body to accumulate any current amyloid and restart the disease. Because I had been doing my own research and I was able to reach out to a cousin within my generation who was also very curious. And also, she was connected to a support network that she said, you've got to go tell your story. You've got to get people to know about our rare disease. And she was very close to her father, and so she could start getting the word out to all her cousins and then connect me to a cousin living in the Bay Area. So it was through going through this oral history with my aunts and uncles and having them give me their early, mid, late stage um, symptoms that I was able to connect with cousins within my own generation and start us very early on with getting in support network and trying to understand our own disease process. Family, we became closer, and that was my own sort of healing. Like, we can't sit in darkness anymore and just be quiet because that perpetuates the trauma.
Absolutely. And then building off that thought, you're a young female caregiver, you're in your early 30s, and then you're caring for another female patient, your mother. Did that
Mm,
situation add any specific challenges to
100%.
being taken seriously by the medical professionals that you're seeking help from?
Yes, and I'm glad you kind of took me back to that. It was incredibly frustrating not to be taken seriously, and I had spent time researching it. I'd go into PubMed, and dive into these thick resource documents to try and educate myself in hopes of being taken seriously. If I spoke their language, would they then respond to me and not brush me off? I would bring my mother in and she would be vomiting blood. And I had saved it, being like, this looks like balsamic vinegar. I don't think this is normal. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's because there's blood in her vomit. And I would actually save it and bring it to the emergency room so that when the doctor saw me, I'd be like, here's a sample of what she's vomiting. Gross, right? And so I felt like I had to be like horror theater in order to be taken seriously and make notes of like, okay, I want to say these things, I'm going to ask for these different diagnostics, and then I'm going to create the second steps with that doctor. And it wasn't until I had gotten into our local kind of HMO Kaiser and found this doctor who had worked in the Mayo Clinic and saw me, being almost a doctor myself, that
Mhm.
we were able to lift each other up and make this more serious. But I had to I had to mask my emotions. I had to mask my desire to just be real. It's scary. It's frightening. It's I'm losing my best friend. And I had to be very stoic, logical,
Mhm.
and not offend an older generation doctor by being too pushy. So it felt like this constant dance where I didn't know the tune. And so that also drove me to be a lot more direct. And it's something in my life now that I don't need as much. And I have to make sure I I temper that because I was a bulldog. I had to be. And it was already there. My mother had done it with her own mother, and I had watched her do that. And sometimes make doctors a little bit upset because you're not taking no. You're not like, oh, okay, we'll just go home and thanks for this bag of 10 different medications. You're so helpful. No, you're not helpful. And I need you to be more helpful. And some doctors don't like that. And I finally found one that enjoyed that, like, no, this isn't helpful and we need something different. And it felt like I walked into a different universe.
Yeah. I think there's so many wonderful lessons in there, but also at the same time, a very unfortunate reality of the need to be a very strong and educated self advocate. Well, for yourself,
Mhm.
but also for your family in situations where there are hereditary diseases. And, that can certainly create challenges and result in maybe some abrasive relationships with medical providers. And it really is just advocating for yourself and almost like going around
Yeah.
and finding someone, continuing to find people until you find someone who's like, you know what, you're right. We are missing something as a medical community, and we need to do better. And I want to take you
We can
seriously.
do better.
Yeah,
Right. And
exactly.
not be, like you said, not be offended.
Yeah,
There was a doctor. I'd taken her into the emergency room. She'd had a seizure. She was, vomiting, a cyclical vomiting. And I overheard some doctors saying, oh, I think we got a drug seeker here. And it took me everything I could not to be so incredibly angry. And I took it for a moment of education. I said,
yeah,
I want you to know that she's got a disease where her stomach is shutting down. The neurons are dying. They cannot innervate. She can't empty her stomach. So it comes back up. You must know what that feels like, right? And she can't keep weight on. She's a 5'9" woman who is now 130 pounds, not because she's on meth, but because her stomach can't digest food due to the neurons unable to innervate because of the amyloid plaques being stuck on her nerves. Are we good now?
yeah,
And knowing to say all those things so that they get slapped with education rather than me just being, how dare you? It's like, even in that moment, my anger had to be tempered, and
yeah,
it had to always come from a point of education when I really should have I felt like going out there and like slapping them both.
yeah,
But, that would get me escorted out of the ER. And I knew that.
absolutely. So, kind of building off that, right? For those who may be listening to this podcast and in a similar situation, but are not entirely comfortable with being that strong advocate, do you have any suggestions for
Mm.
them in terms of how to kind of be effective at advocating for themselves or their family member?
Yeah. Um, have your script, when you go into the hospital, and have your highlight of all the medications you're taking first. So, because in that moment when you're so emotionally heightened, it's hard to remember the daily tasks because, either you or your loved one is experiencing a lot of pain, and the doctor and medical staff that are there to take care of you, right? So you go into that like, oh, I'm going to be cared for, so they'll know. Mm-mm. They're there to understand, and they have their own educational gaps. So I would also suggest having there is always one person in your family who is that go-to person, whether it's, someone who's married in, or a family member that is that kind of carries the carries the history of the family, and but also can speak out. So you have that person with you, or, fortunately now we have phones and we can zoom in to be that body double for you, to be that advocate, so that you have that proximal courage
Hmm.
that they can help you speak up. Because you never know when you're dropping these nuggets of education about a rare disease, what rippling effect that'll have with a medical community that'll tip them off. Oh, I remember this from school. Yes, okay. And then it goes into it's a information sharing rather than the doctor saying, I have to cure this one thing in this moment. Because, like I've mentioned earlier, it's multisystemic. So you will have an ear, nose, and throat doctor. You'll have a gastroenterologist. You'll have a neurologist. Maybe even I've gone to see with my mom because it affects the hearing. So you'll go into an audiologist, a neurological audiologist. So there's all these little side routes, and they only know their one slice. unless you're going into a center of excellence where they've seen it and they know. And they when they hear you demonstrate they hear your health history, they understand, oh, this ties to the disease because it affects this system.
Yeah, I think those are some
So
really wonderful tips because it's not easy to be a strong advocate, and it takes courage, and it takes information and kind of a sense of self-confidence, and so I think those are some really great tips. And changing
thank
gears
you.
now,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
something a little bit different. Just wanting to know, how do you cope with a situation like this? Do you find that interacting with other patients is helpful, or are there some other coping
Mm.
mechanisms that you employ that you have found to be helpful for you throughout this kind of lifelong journey, really?
I've developed some maladaptive coping mechanisms along the way, but also just getting into the support network gave me a sense of belonging that I wasn't alone.
Hmm.
There are other people that have gone through because it's generational. They've done the same thing. They know what it means to lose a parent and to walk through the chaos and watch, a family member, several family members die of this disease. So I also found my A-list study group of people who chase after it like I do. And we share information. I just got a call. My husband jokingly calls it my amyloid husband, where we're constantly checking in with him. I'm like, oh, he called me about 2 weeks ago. I need to check in with him.
Hmm.
And it's just like, how you doing? What have you heard? Are you talking to this pharmaceutical company? Do you know about this clinical trial? So it gives a way to normalize your feelings and normalize the process that this is part of my identity. So having that support group is so very, very important nationally and locally.
Hmm.
And then finding your tribe of people that make you feel better, that you can laugh at some of the darkness, that you can hold each other in ways that only another patient would understand, but also hold each other accountable. Like, have you gone to Boston? Like, I had one of my amyloid mates had skipped a yearly visit, and you're like, no, you know you have to go. And the wife would call me later and be like, thank you for pressuring him because obviously he's not listening to me. So holding each other to account as well. That just because I know we can touch on this later, but the treatment I've been able to kind of create this identity of now my illness is a side gig. It's not the main thing, but to hold each other accountable. So support groups have made my life more rich with this disease.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear that there is something out there that really can provide kind of comfort and support and in such a challenging and difficult situation. Curious to know, right? This is kind of a very extensive family history of disease. So, how did it affect those that are in your life, and particularly your family, but also maybe other relationships that you may have and had in your life, and then kind of how did this
Yeah.
disease impact those?
It definitely within marriages, I've seen marriages crumble. My own parents at one point, they said we're getting a divorce because it my mom was in her dementia was seeking friendship from someone she knew she was young. So we're getting a divorce. And I looked at both of them like, you guys are being stupid.
Mm,
Why would you divorce? And um a lot of anger, especially from me towards family members who I didn't think were facing the trauma of this disease. I've had to what I've learned very acutely is that grief is so very personal
mm,
and how people handle grief can be very confusing. And it's taken me, so my mom passed in 2003. It's taken me nearly 20 years to understand certain family members' decisions because their grief was so overwhelming and to understand why wouldn't my mom and her brother be connected. So it's and also I feel like I'm the only one that talks about her and keeps my mom relevant. I don't have my a sibling, so I'm
mm.
alone. I don't have a sibling to turn to and be like, remember when mom did this? And so sometimes it feels like I'm holding her memory alive by myself.
Yeah.
And that really hurts because she was an amazing woman. Um, and then when, like I mentioned earlier, when I got genetic testing, I was single and purposely so. I felt I was too much of a wreck to date
Oh,
anybody. Be like, "Hi, my life is falling apart. Let's go see a movie." You know? Um, and when she passed, and I was glad that I dealt with a lot of that grief when she was ill, because when she passed, I got to mourn the healthy woman.
mm,
And then there was a point where I realized I'm actually might be a happy person now, rather than a sardonic, tightly wound, grief-stricken young person who is watching their own life fall apart. Took a job that was, you know, a life balance that gave me a lot of free time, but not a lot of pay. So I
mhm,
was kind of climbing back out of my own financial situation, and I met my current husband. And I remember very early on in our dating, because I knew I really liked him right away. I mean, they say when you know, and it's dorky, but I did. He made me feel so at ease. And I'd never felt that before. And, I was always looking for someone to, like, are you going to skip out? Are you going to be that person? Because otherwise I'm not relying on you. And so it created a lot of, like I said, maladaptive coping mechanisms.
mhm,
And so I had to tell him, like, listen, I carry this genetic marker. It's probably very likely I'll develop this disease, and I do want a family, but that means our children have a 50-50 chance of carrying this mutation and developing the disease as well. So here's your exit. If you want out, I'm giving you that exit right now. So there's the door. And I felt like I was being very abrupt. And unfortunately, I love this part of him. He's an engineer and he's very logical. He's like, well, you could step off a curb and get hit by a bus. So why would we live our lives with this doomsday approach rather than living our life that, like, we could have a rich and long life together? And so that gave me permission to think about life with this disease and know that I'm going to do everything to remain healthy. And I even made a promise on our wedding day. And again, that line in the sand, like, I will not get sick. And what I meant by that is not that I could say this isn't going to happen to me, but to stand in the face of this overwhelming hereditary disease and say, I promise to step forward with every intention of getting treatment as and diagnosis as early as possible, and minimize the effects of the disease. That's my promise. That I will get out there and I will chase after it like a dog with a bone. And then I'll make sure that our children see me healthy. They don't see me deteriorate. There isn't a version of well mom and sick mom. It's just going to be mom, and oh, mom's doing this, she's going to Boston every year. Mom's going to go out and go to a patient panel. They see me advocating so that I can scaffold for them what it looks like to be an advocate.
yeah, I think that's a very powerful role model for them,
Yeah.
and, I think this is, obviously a very sensitive topic, but, if you'd be open to it, would you mind sharing with us how how did you and your husband think about children, knowing that there is a 50-50 chance that they may inherit this? Um, is that something that you guys discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, because both of us you know, have deep faith in science, that the laws of probability could be in our favor. And if they were not in our favor, well, then we're going to make sure that they have every opportunity to have access to education about the disease and create their own fight, and that they see the positive aspects. I had told Matt that, I see treatment in already in clinical trial, and I bet in 30 years it'll look completely different. And so we went forward. Like, I truly wanted to be a parent, and we stepped into it when I was 35. And so we were very intentional about having a family and creating joy. And so I think that's kind of been our platform, is that we're going to look for joy rather than heartache. Because if you look, there's heartache everywhere, and especially with this disease, it feels like you're always living with the shadows in your periphery. And so we decided that it was definitely worth the risk. And now now that they're teenagers and they've got their sports and school and preparing for college, it's a lovely chaos, and driving, and sports and more sports and driving and laundry, and the house being a wreck. And I've got towels on my and a hamper overflowing because they're at the pool all the time. So I love it. And I'm glad we get to experience that joy without being like, oh, we got to get them genetic tested. And that's another thing I get a lot. Well, don't you think you should get them genetic testing to know? Absolutely not. This is not their identity. This isn't the whole of who they are.
Mhm.
Who they are is them. And I treat genetic testing as a diagnostic tool. What do you get out of that information? What are you
Mhm.
going to do with that information?
Yeah.
So we were very intentional in deciding to start a family.
Mhm.
So I find that we're very lucky.
Yeah. Certainly a welcome chaos, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like at dinner last night, siblings. You've got a brother and
Absolutely.
fighting at the dinner table. Fighting at the dinner table. We just like ran home, made dinner, and you're fighting in front of me over nothing. The bathroom, come on. But then this laughing about it later, like, well, thanks for making up for us at the table.
Mhm.
So I welcome that, all
So,
that comes with being a parent.
so going a little bit into that a little bit more, how you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but how are there any specifics about the disease you've discussed with your children? I mean, obviously they are aware of its presence, right? They see you going to appointments and advocating for this disease, but is there anything kind of, what have you talked about with them in terms of this disease?
I've tried, yes, one is always talking about it. I don't want it in the darkness.
Yeah.
And letting them know that there's some things, especially in the beginning when I started experiencing my first symptoms, letting them know like, hey, we can go to this event, but I'm going to probably have to duck out early. Standing in the sun makes my feet feel like they're on fire.
Mm.
And I'm going to have an expiration time where I'm going to need to duck out. Or I'd love to go on that bike ride with you, but first I need a nap because for whatever reason I'm completely exhausted. So mom needs to build up her reserves. Is how I handled it because my daughter, when I first started experiencing symptoms, my daughter was in kindergarten, my son was in the second grade. So I every year as I've gotten older, I've tried to build a framework around how me and how this disease and I um, go forward affects them and affects me being a mom. So like I'll be I would often kind of flex my hand and my kids would notice it. What's going on with your hand, mom? Well, right now my hands are swollen and they hurt. And I know in a half an hour they'll probably feel better. Or hey, can you pick up these groceries? Right now I'm just feeling kind of weak. Or I just had treatment. So could you guys keep the bickering down to a minimum? I just want to rest. So just making it part of my everyday life, and my symptoms are doing X, so therefore we need to do this a little differently, and not letting them worry over it. Like, I got this. This is just part of what's happening with me. Or when they see me very sad, you know, to let them know this in this moment, I don't feel strong, and I just need this moment to be sad. And my son, each of my children handle it differently. My son will
Mhm.
just come and sit next to me. My daughter will interview me. What about this? What about that? Would you need this? So I've allowed them to also be their curious self. Like when I first started treatment, I had to fly every 21 days to Portland, Oregon.
Mhm.
And before I did it, I kind of let them know this is what I'm going to have to do. And so I'm going to be gone for 3 days, 2 to 3 days every 21 days because I need this. And I asked them, what do you think about this medication? And each of them asked their own questions. My son had asked, is this supply always going to be there? Is there ever going to be like a not, it will be out
Mm.
and you won't be able to get it? And so we had to talk about that. My daughter asked, what if it stops working? So it allowed them to air their own concerns and me kind of get a feeling of how they're viewing it, the disease.
Yeah.
So, and being very scientific always basing my symptoms in a scientific way so that I feel like I'm building their own living dictionary.
Yeah. I, I can certainly understand the kind of importance of wanting to include them what it is that you go through and what it is that you have to do because of your disease. And, like you said, science is exciting. And so, it'll be really interesting
Mhm.
to see, you know, 20, 30 years from now when they're in their 40s, what does medicine look like? What does their treatment landscape look like? And I certainly hope it's
Yeah, me too.
a lot
I
more diverse.
believe in my bones. Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe in my bones it'll be different,
Yeah.
and that's what I keep telling them, like, "You don't need to get genetic testing now because it's that information isn't useful."
Yeah.
Um, but also the treatment landscape will be different, so who knows what you'll need to do in preparation for that landscape, but it will
Yeah.
look very different.
Yeah. And
And
that's
so
exciting.
I even took it is exciting. I took my daughter to Boston for one of my sister-in-law met us, and I took her to uh, m one of my patient panels with one of the therapeutic companies. And so she got to be there hearing me talk to a panel of, experts on CRISPR,
Mhm.
and me asking them questions and being able to say, "Have you thought about this?" So, that to me felt like a powerful moment to have her there.
Mhm.
I'm certainly not a doctor. I don't have advanced degrees, but I feel like I've passed my own PhD dissertation with my family's version of this disease.
Yeah.
And I want that living history to be part of my kids so that
Mhm.
they have that with them.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know
So,
when they may
yeah.
need it.
Right. And that's how exactly I address it. I don't know when they'll be able to, if they will be able to pull back memories or pull back, my own experience in their lives
Mhm. Yeah.
or pull forward.
So to wrap it up, one final
Yeah.
closing question for you. What would your message be for those that are diagnosed with hereditary amyloidosis and are facing kind of sort of the overwhelming challenge that lays in front of them?
I think you heard earlier me kind of joke about amyloidosis being a side gig now,
Mm.
but I did make it my job. I and I was very fortunate that I could do that. That I could take the time to make it my full-time job of seeking out specialists and getting involved in patient panels. But you have to, I should say you have to. I certainly treated it um, as a business. We're not networked.
Mhm.
I had a friend of mine who is a nurse say your health is your wealth. So I was in wealth management. I made sure I took every opportunity possible to advocate for
Yeah.
myself and gain information and be a part of every discussion. Um, and also with any disease, whether it's cancer or hereditary amyloidosis or anything that is a chronic illness that breaks your body down over time, the sooner you can stop that um, disease degradation or the decaying your body. I felt like it was
Mhm.
decaying my body from within. As soon as you can stop it, the better. And it was hard. I had some very down days. Developed this wonderful, colorful anxiety disorder that I've learned to live with. And recognizing your down days and when you need support, but
Mm.
catching it early and getting treatment as soon as possible. Um, and advocating, either have someone who is an advocate with you that can scaffold what it looks like to be an advocate, or find your strength within to be your own advocate.
Mm.
Because I've had no problem challenging specialists,
Yeah.
um, and not challenging in that, like, how much do you know about this disease? If you don't know, you need to refer to someone who does. Please don't sit in your education and rest on your laurels. You have to continually learn.
Yeah.
Um, and that ultimately a doctor is like your business partner. So if you don't have a good business partner, find a better one.
Mm.
It is okay to fire a medical professional, to
Yep.
walk out and say, I don't think this is going to work for us. I'm going to find someone who does. And no offense, I just don't think this is going to work for us.
Mm.
and go out and find someone new. I watched own family members be tied to one particular doctor because they had such good bedside manner. I don't care about bedside manner. I mean, mostly. I mean, thankfully, the medical profession has become more concerned with the bedside manner. But just because I like someone doesn't mean they're going to do the best by me. So life is too short to allow someone else to stand in your way.
Mm.
If Because with this disease, every day that you're not getting treatment is every day these amyloid fibrils are collecting in your body and getting in the way of organ um, development or your organs performing correctly, or your ability for you to feel pain, hold, just being able to ambulate, walk. I still have a bit of a drag on my right foot.
Mm.
um, so yeah, get out there and make it your business that your body is your wealth, and you've got to make sure you're handling your wealth management.
Yeah. Well, I think those are some really exceptional points to be made.
Thank you.
But as always, thank you so much, Dawn, for sharing your family story about hereditary amyloidosis.
Well, I truly appreciate the opportunity. These questions have it every time I get to speak about this, I feel like I sort out all my trauma into neater boxes. I don't feel like it gets less and less messy over time. And I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to share my family story in hopes that someone out there might feel that connection and feel heard and seen.
Yeah. And I certainly imagine there are members of our audience who feel that way. So, we're very grateful to have you. Um, but just understanding how this disease has traveled throughout generations in your family and how you interacted with the medical community and then how you prepare for your next generation who might inherit this disease, and
Mhm.
it really has been a truly valuable discussion for all of us, and there's a lot of great lessons that our listeners can gain from today's episode. So again, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the All Things Amyloid podcast. If you find our podcast informative, please follow and share it with others. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing at Mackenzie's Mission, please visit mm713.org. We'd also like to thank AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and Bridge Biopharma for their sponsorship to help raise awareness about amyloidosis. We hope you stay tuned for future episode drops. Thanks for listening.